Alright, we got 3 movies this week, coming from 3 different directions. There is one newly released in theaters, one newly released on DVD, and one that just went up on Netflix today, or yesterday when you're seeing this technically. So, we're gonna start at the theater, obviously, and go into American Made, which is the reteaming of Tom Cruise and Doug Liman after Edge of Tomorrow. And this, it feels like this was made forever ago, because I remember a long while back when it was called Mina, and seeing the first still where it showed off how Cruise had, like, put on a little weight, and he had, like, the missing tooth, and everybody was like, is this finally him going back into, how for a long time there Cruise was known for his more Oscar-y movies, and if this was going to be one of those, and he was going back to that territory. I don't think that's the case here. I think people figured that out as soon as not only the title change happened, but when everything started coming out to give you the vibe of this movie, because it's, from what I understand, the vibe you would get from advertising is pretty much what this is. Where well, obviously we're starting off and we're doing the whole kind of 70s, 80s thing. And obviously one of the first things a movie does if it wants to set the tone lately is, or the setting, is use the old logos. And while that is, nowadays that's getting to be a really old gimmick, I still kind of really liked the way this movie did that, where it starts with the newer logos and then goes back to the old-fashioned versions of them. And right then and there, you kind of get a vibe, just in the opening logos, how flashy this movie is going to be. It's really, really damn flashy, pretty much the whole time. And it's kind of like, this movie is basically the Infiltrator. Remember the Bryan Cranston movie from, was that only last year? It feels like forever ago. But it's a cross, it feels like a cross between the Infiltrator and War Dogs, however you felt about those. So, and obviously we've got what feels like a Scorsese vibe happening, so you gotta get used to that pretty quick. There is, pretty much right away, there is the really, really erratic editing, and every now and then there's a zoom in or a zoom out to close out a scene. And it's basically just a matter of how quick you might get tired of the movie's style before you're even focusing on what exactly the story is and everything else about it. But for a while there, it's pretty much, it kind of stays the same through the whole movie, for me anyway, to where, like, it's fine, and there's never really a moment where it's not fine. And it just kind of keeps that up the whole way, so props for its consistency. And it didn't really feel like it went downhill at any particular time, but it's a movie that's just kind of stays in kind of its own straight line and kind of gives you pretty much what you're going to get from the start, and just keeps giving you that until it's over. Following this guy, Barry Seal, who is apparently a real dude, and this apparently really happened, or at least most of it, or however much you believe exactly what translates from real life to the screen. Where he is basically given this open spot in the CIA by Donald Gleason, who just kind of up and gives it to him randomly at a bar or a restaurant or something. And it's all kind of vague, I guess, as the CIA would be. And that's pretty much, thinking back on it, I'm kind of getting very, very vague Confessions of a Dangerous Mind flashbacks as well. And we get to see this character progress from being just the normal pilot that he was to taking this job, and the riches that he gets. And like I said, it's those Scorsese movies about building up into excess are very, very apparent here. And this is the kind of guy where he goes from a normal job and a normal family to being that guy to where there's an actual moment when he has to keep the bags of money in various places around his house so it can't be found easily. And at one point, like, a dog or something digs it up, and the money just goes everywhere. And when his wife says, there's bills all over the backyard, he just very casually, very nonchalantly says, I'll rake it up in the morning. That's how much fucking money this guy has. And really, obviously, the main focus here is Cruise. Like, Cruise is basically the reason to see this. Like, if Cruise wasn't giving his all in this movie, the movie would totally and completely fall apart, because he's pretty much the main focus and all you would really want to be here for anyway. Because the story is kind of something we've seen many times over, and Cruise brings, even though his appearance is a little more disheveled than usual, he's still he still gets to be the very charismatic and fast-talking and lively kind of guy that's very convincing and is magnetic through most of the movie. And then we kind of... It's interesting to watch what he does, because he's the kind of guy that is fearless in the way that he flirts so close with potential death or the law, and he just goes right for it. Those scenes when he's in the plane, once again, it kind of brings a flashback of Casino. The moments when he's in the plane and he's being chased in other planes by law enforcement, and he pretty much just slows down and waits for them to run out of gas. It kind of reminded me of the scene in Casino when they're circling the house and they have to land because they did it too long and ran out of gas. And this is obviously... The problem with the movie, though, is that, and the reason it remains just at fun, it doesn't really go any higher, despite what Cruise is constantly bringing, is the fact that this whole flashiness about it, you'll notice, like, when you watch a Scorsese movie, how fast those movies go, like, with Goodfellas being 2.5 hours, Casino being 3 hours, but those movies just seem to fly by because they just feel constantly like, throw in The Wolf of Wall Street as well. And here, it's like, it's so flashy that it feels like it's getting ahead of itself, because normally, when you get used to this, and when movies use it in a great way, and really make the story flow and keep everything going, you kind of get used to that. So when you come across movies like this that maybe aren't doing it as well, or feel sort of like knockoffs, it's to a point to where the movie has been so flashy up to a point that you feel like it should be well over halfway through right now, and it's like 20 minutes in. So that becomes a problem very quickly and throughout the movie. It's really got a pacing problem. It does. Like most movies that try to do this and don't have, it's almost filmmakers' talent. So, and then obviously they do different things that sometimes work, like stuff that may be overdone. Something you'd normally see in like a documentary, like the animated history lesson, is fine. There's a really clever sequence when he talks about how much faith he has in Reagan, and where basically, as he's describing Reagan's actions as a president, they're using footage of him from his movies to coincide with it and kind of match up with it. I thought that was really well done. So when they're doing stuff like that, it works, but then... like I said, it just really... There is kind of a stopping point to where the charm kind of fades away a little bit, and it just feels like it's starting to be just a tiny bit of a slog in the middle parts. Not so much by the end, but there are moments in the middle to where it just kind of like... It doesn't really feel like we're going anywhere, despite the fact that there are certain standalone scenes, like the... him not sure if he has enough runway on this place that has killed so many other pilots that have attempted to do this, and the weight discussion. They all make their own great individual scenes, but there's just a lot of in-between to where it feels kind of a bit empty. And we've got a few side characters that stand out, like Donald Gleason's character I was just talking about, to where throughout the whole movie, the thing that makes him intriguing is he has this kind of... His level of trustworthiness seems very ambiguous, like every time we see him. And it's always... We do know where he's coming from, but there's still just something about him that's mysterious enough to where it's like, is he leading him in the right direction, or is he leading him towards a fall? We're never really quite sure for a long time. So I thought that was great. And then there is Caleb Landry Jones also, who is, I guess, going to be the weird brother from now on. He was the weird brother in The Last Exorcism. He's the weird brother in Get Out. And now he is the brother of Cruise's wife. And obviously, because he's played by Caleb Landry Jones, is going to get into trouble in one way or another. And kind of screw up the vibe here. And he's really good, as he always is. There's a character I'm really not quite sure how to take, and that is Jesse Plemons. And I think I wouldn't have a problem with this character if he wasn't played by Jesse Plemons. And the reason I say that is because, well, no, this is kind of on the movie too, because when you see him and you see that he is law enforcement, you think, well, he's probably a big deal because he's played by a recognizable face and he's law enforcement in a movie about, you know, smuggling drugs. So we're introduced to him and he doesn't really do anything. He's just sitting at a desk. This is basically just, hey, this guy's going to be important. And then a few scenes go by, and then he comes back. But once again, he doesn't really do anything. He's just kind of there. And there's even a moment where we get a whole scene of him where he doesn't even have lines. Like, we just kind of see him in passing, just, like, reacting, and then he's gone again. And this is all building up to the fact that he does have a major purpose. Like, he has something that he is going to do that's going to... He's going to serve his purpose. But the thing is that once he serves his purpose, it has a little bit to do with the story, and we never see him again. And it's like, you spend all that time, because every time I think, this is just the first example that comes to mind. Olivia Martinez in SWAT. How we just keep seeing his character throughout the movie, but his story seems so unrelated to everything else, and then suddenly he's the plot, because it just ties in like that. You think it's going to be something like that, where we just keep seeing him in these tiny doses, and then suddenly he's going to be a really big deal, and it's like, he does come into the story, he does serve a purpose, but it's kind of a minuscule purpose, and he's gone. It hardly has an effect on anything. So it's like, maybe not only if they didn't build him up for a few scenes before this happened, and it's like, maybe if it was just some random actor that didn't seem like they were trying to draw attention to the character by putting a name with it, maybe that wouldn't be so weird. But the way it plays out is just like, it felt like a whole lot of build-up for nothing, and for a movie that's already struggling to kind of get from place to place without kind of slowing down, because its flashiness is really slowing the pace down, that just seems really unnecessary. So, I thought that was just weird more than anything else. So, and there's also scenes that, talking about, going on the reverse now about it being kind of a slog in some places, there's sometimes where it seems like it might get interesting and then it just stops. Like, the scene's just cut off. Like, the moment when, he's confronting Caleb Landry Jones about buying a new car. And you think it's going to be the coat scene from Goodfellas when De Niro threw a fit. And Cruise is like, dude, you can't do that. Like, that's his actual lines, like, you can't do that. And that's it. That's the scene. It stops there and goes on to something else. So it's like, maybe it's trying to build up the recklessness of Caleb Landry Jones' character, but I don't know. It just seems like we were going to get a really good scene here, and maybe some tension or something, and we just didn't. That's just, I guess that wasn't what the scene was supposed to be for. So we just went on, and it really felt like there was something missing there, and something that could really give the movie... There are so many more things that this movie has the opportunity to give it flair, and they're not really using the right things. They're trying to use the editing and the flashiness for their flair, but it's like, with these characters and their situations, there are so many other ways to do that. You can add tension, you can, spice up the dialogue and make it more threatening, like there's something looming. But it just seems way too focused on the, let's be as fast and flashy looking as possible. So, but that probably makes it sound worse than I'm making it out. It's still fine, and it's still, like, it's tolerable. Like, it's not, the flashiness isn't annoying or anything. Like, it's not like that. And it's pretty in your face, but it's not like, oh my god, I can't stand this in your face. So, but yeah, it really does mess up the flow, though, even though when it's pretty much trying to do the exact opposite. And yeah, one more thing I wanted to mention that I passed up about Cruz, and what I thought was interesting that he did here, now that we've talked about the side characters, is the fact that there aren't a huge amount of big names in this. Like, there's people who are recognizable now, like Donald Gleason, after his, big 2015 year. I think everybody knows who he is from something. Whether it be like something huge like Star Wars or The Revenant or something like Ex Machina or so on. His one scene in True Grit. But then there is, and you know, Caleb Landry Jones you've probably seen around at some point or another. Get Out has probably made him recognizable to most people now. But for the most part, a lot of the faces here aren't that recognizable, especially when you look at the fact that the movie stars Tom Cruise, like one of the biggest names in the entire world. And so you would think the idea of Cruise being the star of this movie that he would be distracting because he's next to a bunch of people that half a normal audience probably wouldn't recognize or at least be able to name. And that he's able to blend in with these actors that we may not know at all or maybe know a little bit, and that he doesn't. It sounds like it means he's falling short, but that's not what I mean. Where it's like, it's not that his name and his presence stand tall against the others. He's able to kind of bring it down with this character and able to blend right in with his surroundings and the actors around him. And it doesn't just feel... Well, I do feel like Cruise is, you know, the main reason to watch the movie, and he's on fire through the whole thing. It doesn't necessarily feel like when he's working off of other people that he's upstaging them, which I think is actually really effective in a way to show that he's able to do that with the star power that he has, and not necessarily just, you know, be the movie by itself. He leaves room for the movie to be itself, while also just happening to star one of the biggest names in the world, but still, the movie never quite lives up to that. The show is always going to be him, even if he did make that room for it, but the movie's just, by itself, is not strong enough, but it's still perfectly fine and engaging enough to get you to the end, and obviously his presence has a lot to do with that, so... Yeah, it's fine. I just have to keep saying that. That's all I can really... That's as far as I can really go with how much this... I guess you could say how much promise this movie did have, but once it did, to its credit, it did make itself apparent of what it was pretty quickly. There isn't like a bait and switch thing going on here, so... yeah, isn't that weird? We live in a time now to where not doing bait and switch advertising, no matter what your movie is considered something to be complimented for. So, that's just what we're dealing with now. So, let's go to DVD land. 47 Meters Down. That shark movie. Because we're still making shark movies in 2017. They can still work, they just haven't for a long time. And we're going, I mean, I know everybody loves The Shallows. I really, really don't, but I know a lot of people do. And this movie does kind of feel like it's in the wake of The Shallows. Like it's kind of... You could tell it's somebody almost like seeing the success of The Shallows and kind of trying to stay in that range. But it's also like open water. It's basically open water from the other side of the water, is what this movie is. And which I'm okay with, because I love open water, despite the fact that its minimalist outlook kind of threw some people off. Well, it has straight-to-video sequels that make up for that, I'm sure, but the thing that was weird about this, that kind of started it off, was, I don't know what this opening sequence is, but it was like, I don't know if it was trying to set a tone or what it was, but it just felt weird. But the opening shot is Mandy Moore in like a floating chair in a pool, and her friend is coming up like a shark, I guess? And then it's like really slow and ominous, and then Mandy Moore has a red drink in her hand, and when she gets tipped over by her friend, the water goes red. And then it's like, oh, well, they're just friends playing and all that stuff. And then she goes away. But then we show the title, and it's like the drink in the water. But it's like, we're well aware this is just Mandy Moore's drink in the water. But it's like, it's supposed to be really, you know, dooming or something. I don't know. And then the director thinks very highly of himself. He is so proud to have his name on this movie. That we have, not only do we have, like, you know, the regular director credit, and he's all around. He's like a co-writer, all that stuff in the opening credits where you see a director's name. And then, if that's not enough, the last thing they show is the title. And when the title comes up, his name with apostrophe S at the top of it, like he's fucking Tyler Perry. He is that proud of 47 Meters Down that it is his movie, and he must let you know that in the title, only after we've seen his name already like 4 or 5 times in the credits. So, it's like, okay, I'm getting ready to watch a shark movie that the director is really, really proud to have his name on. Let's see what happens. And so it's your kind of basic setup. We have the 2 girls who are friends. One of them is heartbroken, and so the other wants to take her on vacation to show him that she's fun and she's not boring like he said she was, and why he broke up with her. So what do? They go on vacation. They have drinks with dudes they just met that they talk to and socialize with as if they've known them their whole lives. They're very, very comfortable with these dudes they just met. So these dudes are like, hey, why don't we take you swimming with the sharks and all that. And so they go out with Matthew Modine, who is the dude who basically knows how all this shit works. And they're on this really rusty, rickety boat, and they are illegally chumming the water to get the sharks to come. And it's like, at what point do you turn back? It's like, I know you want to impress your ex, but it's like, how far are you really willing to go? I know that kind of stuff can like mess up your head and make you do shit that seems crazy in retrospect, but I mean, there are so many red flags here. It makes you start to wonder, when is this their own fault? What happens to them? But, you know, that comes with the territory most of the time. So, there's that. And it is, to their credit, it is a pretty scary concept that they set up. The cage is just right here, right under the boat, and then just an accident, just a malfunction happens, there's no sinister goings on or anything, and they just plummet to the sea floor, and they are stuck there with the sharks surrounding them. Like, Mandy Moore, like, hits her face on something on the way down, so she's bleeding, so the sharks are coming. It's a scary concept, for sure. And it's just a matter of how they handle it from then on. Right off, I was talking recently about how it's been happening for a while now, but the release of Alien Covenant really brought it out, where people just want to absolutely hate horror movies now. Really anything, but mainly horror movies, for the stupid decisions the characters make. And it's like, most of the time, there are smart horror movies that get around this, but for the most part, it's like, it's one of those cases where if the characters don't do these things, then we don't have a movie. And I can understand how that could seem really lazy, particularly on a writer's part. But even so, it's like, I feel like it's gotten way out of hand, to where it's like, a movie can be really good quality-wise. It could be like really well made, really well crafted, really well acted. But it's like, if a character does something that's vaguely an idiotic thing to do, people accuse the whole movie of being a piece of shit. And it's like, that's really getting way out of hand. And I imagine it happened with this movie as well, if I had to guess. There is some questionable realism. But then, like, there's, whether they can hear, you know, what exactly they can hear at the seafloor, and, like, how exactly the air works. But the thing here is that I'm not going to pretend that I know the exact science of what goes down and what you can and cannot do or hear on the seafloor. But, I mean, there are cases where it's kind of like, she says, hey, you know, knock on a rock so I know where you are. And she's, like, in the abyss somewhere, and she hears her knocking on the rock. I'm not sure how that works. And I can't call it out for that. But for the most part, it's like, I don't want to delve too much into that, because look at this damn movie. I know there are movies that I have gone after, and I say that just look at the type of movie it is not an excuse. But the fact that the movie was working for me enough with its concept and the way it was executed up to this point, that here it was just like, okay, that's probably not something that would happen, and that's probably not something that character should do, was able to just kind of blow past me because I was already in it. And that's where this movie accomplished what it needed to, where other movies might fail, and I can't accept stupid shit. You might be wondering exactly how they were able to pull that off, despite the what I thought was kind of a bizarre opening credit sequence. And the thing here is that this movie is surprisingly focused on its characters for being an almost non-stop movie about being in a cage surrounded by sharks. And when we have this opening, because it's obvious, it's very, the characters are still very, no, like, we've seen these characters a million times at the start of horror movies, and they just have their little backstories in here so that you're kind of supposed to care about them, but it doesn't really matter because all writers typically want to do is kill them. But here, it's obviously only going to be these two that are in danger, and their bond really has to work for the tension to be there when the time comes. And these scenes that start out, even though we get the usual backstories or whatever, they find little ways to still kind of make it work. One way that really stood out to me, that I was like really surprisingly impressed with, was that the fact that this movie is PG-13, and because of that, we know that usually in a PG-13 movie you can get away with saying fuck 3 times, but usually they just say it once, and they try to make it. They try to put it to as much effective use as they possibly can, and there's some really good ones out there. And what this movie does is it takes this movie it's 2 girls in a cage surrounded by sharks at the seafloor. Now, if this movie is going to use its one usage of fuck, there is a very good chance it's going to be in panic, right? Or to really show off just how screwed they feel in this situation. They don't. It's dropped before they're even in the water. It's before it's even that day. It's the night before when they use it for Mandy Moore to express how she feels about what she did to her relationship and how it might be her fault. And she just says something very casual along the lines of, I had something good and then I had to go and fuck it up. And it's like the fact that they could have used that in one of the really intense scenes, and they used it to show how she feels about where she's put herself in this story, is like, that's a pretty bold move for a shark movie. And I'm it's like, you did your job there, right? If that's where you're going to use that, then I'm now under the impression that she really truly feels that way. So I thought that was an interesting approach to take with that. And another thing here is that usually a weakness to a movie is how much you can compare it to another movie. That's usually this movie has nothing to offer because I saw it all in this movie and it's much worse here. But when it actually, where the comparisons actually strengthen it a little bit, are the fact that I was thinking about 2 movies going into this, The Shallows and Open Water. And it was like, okay, so is this going to be open water when they're just kind of have to wait and see what happens, and there's a lot in between where we just kind of see how these characters are going to do this? Or is it going to be like The Shallows, and are they going to be, shooting at sharks and impaling them on shit? And it's like, it's actually a lot more like Open Water than it is The Shallows. So it's whether, I know that for a lot of people that's probably the reverse effect, but for me this is when I just really was like, okay, if it's going to be more like Open Water, then yeah, I'll take this. And it did, because it has... the thing about it is it's not necessarily like how the characters communicate or anything like that, but it's just... it kind of feels like it has the bleakness of Open Water. And how that kind of... in a movie like this, typically it's like, oh, just eat them, I don't care. But it was enough to where it actually really did feel dooming when we were in some of these circumstances, regardless of how maybe, cheesy CGI the sharks might look, which, of course, they will. So, and I also like the fact that a very easy angle this could have taken was that the reason they're in this scenario is because the guys ended up being shady. And it's like, they're actually not. It takes... there are times where we question it, but overall it's like, no, this whole situation came about strictly because of an accident, of a malfunction. And that actually... it gives it kind of less of a movie-like... it's still very much a movie, because there's still that stuff in there, but I mean, it would have felt very contrived and really made it even more artificial if it had been like, oh, these are guys that take tourists and just drop them into the ocean because. But it's not like that at all, so I thought that added a little something as well. And also, based on that, the fact that this is also kind of what gave me this vibe was there's no cut back. Like, pretty much once they're under the water, we stay there the whole time. And that really kind of helps build a certain tension and a kind of claustrophobia and a we can't get out feel for the audience as well as the characters themselves. And I thought that was a really good move because pretty much any other movie in the world would be constantly cutting back up to the dudes kind of rushing around and trying to figure out what's going on and all that. But there's always that mystery that looms of what exactly are they doing up there and what's taking so long. And that's the thing, too, where we also have that character time to where it's like you would think it has to be non-stop once they're in the water because the sharks are always there. But they're still in the confines of the cage, and there is that time to where the movie can settle down and have time for them to talk as normal characters because there are those waiting periods where there's nothing for them to do except wait for them up there to do something about this. So they have those little bits of time. They are brief, but they're still there. These little bits of time where they actually get to be them, and then we get to feel that bond between the two of them that really does amp up the tension when shit starts to go down. That's not to say that there isn't, and it's not just the lack of realism stuff that people typically get pissed off at. There's still that other stuff, like, there'll be characters that unnecessarily talk out loud for the sake of the audience, which can, you know, kind of make it less, kind of take the tension away because it gets more movie-like. And then there is a particular moment. This might be saying too much, but I mean, it's like, if you were to hear this in the movie too, there's just something in this movie that Matthew Modine says about the side effects of the oxygen tanks that he sends down to them. And it's like the second he says that, you know where this damn movie is going. You know the exact moment. And so many movies like this, even ones that are considered very good, have this bullshit moment in it. And this movie is not above that. So, and you, like, just as soon, even though it's like 30 to 40 minutes away, the second he says that, you know what's coming. So, yeah, but still, there's enough tension here, and I really like the whole, how much that, you know, push to, you just, yeah, it really kind of, it's not strong enough to, like, put you in their position, but it's enough to make you feel the certain thrills that come with this territory enough, despite the fact that some stupid shit might be in there, but I don't think it's damning to the movie, that stuff. So I think the characters are strong enough, and the tension is strong enough that, yeah, this movie works to an extent, so that's the way I would put it. But I can totally see this movie also just being hated by everybody, so there's that. Alright, our last movie is going to be the new Netflix movie, Gerald's Game, which is based on a Stephen King novel, which to my understanding, I don't know, I keep hearing it's a really great twisted King novel, and I keep hearing that people think it's one of his worst. So I'm not familiar with the source material. I was not familiar with the story at all, actually, until I saw this earlier today, so before I left for American Made. So, when it begins, actually, I will say, I'm going to go ahead and say something now, and it's like, if you want to go into this blind, you might just want to do that, because I knew the concept of the movie before I started it. I at least knew that. But apparently they're, like, really shrouding the concept in mystery. Like, they're not really letting anybody know exactly what leads to what, just to get to the setup of the movie, which I will go into because you really can't talk about it without doing that. So obviously, Bruce Greenwood and Carla Gugino are this married couple, and their lives are not very spicy anymore. So he's going to take her out to a house in the middle of nowhere, where everybody is gone. Like, no gardeners are coming, no maintenance people, no neighbors, nothing. and he's going to handcuff her to the bed to fulfill this rape fantasy of sorts. And while this is happening, they start to argue, and while they're arguing, he has a heart attack and dies while she's still handcuffed to the bed. And there is a dog that's been roaming around, a stray dog, and after he has his heart attack, he rolls off the bed, and she basically has to try to figure out, by dissecting her past and then dealing with other personal demons, how to get out of this situation while ultimately losing her mind while her husband's body is being eaten by a dog at the foot of the bed. That's the setup. That is the start. That is the starting point. So, you kind of wonder, okay, where can this go? And our director is Mike Flanagan, who did Oculus and Ouija Origin of Evil and Hush. And it was like, when I heard the concept, I immediately got the Hush vibe, because it was like, you hear the concept and you're like, there's only so much you can do with this. But it's like, after seeing what he did with Hush, it's like, okay, I can see him pulling this off, but how are they going to do it? And you might think, if you're expecting it to be a movie to where it's like a whole psychological thing, where it's like a one-person show of Carla Gugino handcuffed to a bed trying to figure out how to get out of it, you're probably going to be disappointed. It's not that. That's kind of what I thought it might be, but then again, it is. Then you really, when you see this movie won't even go there, you kind of start to think, yeah, can that be pulled off? That's still a question that remains unanswered. But what this movie actually does is it takes a lot of different things to get around, because the movie is an hour and 43 minutes, which with this setup probably sounds really long. But they have different ways of doing it. There's, I was afraid they were going to waste Bruce Greenwood, because he is an amazing actor. Like, Meek's Cutoff. Meek's Cutoff is probably one of the most boring movies you will ever see, but my god, he's amazing in it. And he's obviously going to have this one moment, but then it's like, eventually the whole plot kicks into gear when he dies, like 10 minutes in. But he's in the whole movie because she has this kind of, her thoughts kind of manifest in him, a vision of him talking to her, and then there's also a version of herself there. So it's like a 3-character play, but 2 of these characters are the same actress. And this is what it is for a while, and they really make it work, and they take it in interesting psychological directions, and kind of reveal things about her we don't know. It's kind of like, they kind of risk to where, this is a movie where you'll kind of be asking yourself, and this is probably the case often with movies like this with very few characters in one setting, to where it's like, it tends to get overwhelming when you have movies with a lot of exposition where characters just talk about their past and all that, and how they've gotten to this point, and it's kind of like, this is a movie that'll have you asking the question, where does exposition stop and storytelling begin? Because that line is kind of vague here. And then, but at the same time, with this kind of setup where the movie is all dialogue, that's kind of, you just have to have a strength in doing expositional stuff in order to get this out without it just seeming like they're just kind of reciting our backstories to us, and kind of get that film stage play criticism that a lot of people use. And even though that does work, and for a while, there's even the moment when this reaching for a glass of water has never been so intense in any movie ever, and probably never will be. It never will be again, this intense. And suspenseful, but then, after a while, we do go into flashbacks. And it's kind of like, you get the concept of the movie, and you see how it's playing out, and it stays there for a while, but then we get to a flashback, kind of late in, like maybe 40 minutes or so, and it's kind of like, and it's like, you think, well, at the same time, it's like, yeah, how are they going to pull this off for a whole feature length? But at the same time, it's kind of like, man, flashbacks feel like cheating. They really feel like cheating with this scenario. But once you get past that, and you realize there's still an hour of the movie left, it starts to occur to you how important these flashbacks are, and how they do, in fact, tie into everything that has gotten her to this point, where she's handcuffed to a bed with a dead husband. And there are certain moments here where you kind of, it'll be interesting to point out parallels throughout the movie, kind of like the moment when Bruce Greenwood comes out of the bathroom when they're getting ready to start the game, and he just sees her laying there in this thing that she just bought, and he says, "You look amazing." And while that is a very, you know, common line and not very... It's just a very common line, so you may not think much of it, but then for some reason I remembered it immediately in a scene when we see her as a child, and she's having a flashback of her dad, Henry Thomas, and Henry Thomas sees her in a dress and says the same thing. And then it's like, you kind of start to see where everything is going to kind of tie together here. And that even though it may seem like the movie is totally bleeding into something else, still everything we're seeing is relevant to what we saw before it. And it is obviously visually really well done as well, which Flanagan has shown a knack for. And it's one of those, there's a particular scene involving an eclipse, and then it's kind of like what transpires in this scene. It's like, I never thought I would see a scene so beautifully shot that is so gross and uncomfortable at the same time. To where it's like, this is, what's happening in this scene is so revolting, and it's like so kind of counterbalanced with how beautifully shot it is. And it's really, it gives you conflicting emotions for sure. And so, and there are a lot of creative visuals kind of blending these, like the moment when when it's a flashback where Henry Thomas and the young version of her are in like the bathroom, and then as we pan out or pull back, they're still in there in the background while Carla Gugino now is in the foreground. And so it's stuff like that to where it might seem a bit, you know, obvious, but it still does work the way it all flows together. It does, there are still moments, regardless of all these flashbacks, where it does feel like it's straining a little bit for the runtime. They add a character about halfway through, and it's sort of like, it's the weird bag of bones guy, and it's kind of like, he feels like a very forced horror element in what was essentially just a purely psychological story. But it's like they really desperately wanted to make it a horror story in a sense, in like just a little bit. So this guy is just there, and then, and that takes us in a direction that's really, it just really, I know this is just a King thing, but I mean for real, this just goes so weirdly off the rails and random in the last 10 minutes. It's like, you don't even know, I still don't know how to process it yet. I don't know what the point of all that was, but it's in there. So there is that. And it does feel like I was saying, some of the stuff can seem very on the nose and very literal to a fault. But it does still do what it does perfectly fine, and it holds its own for a while, but then after a while it does start to wear down. Even the scenes that are just the dialogue between the two of her and Greenwood does kind of start to feel a bit redundant, and like we're just kind of really trying to get to an hour and 40-minute runtime for some reason. I don't know. And then there is, and we do still have, you know, despite the minimal setup here, we do have some big gross out moments. There is a hand wound in this movie that rivals, if not tops, the one in Green Room. If you didn't think that was possible, it is. So look forward to that if you haven't laid eyes on that yet. But yeah, so I do get what they're going for, and it works for a while. And as we get there, and it does kind of, you can sense like a 127 hours vibe for sure, among many other things, with a very small setting where somebody is immobile, more or less. But there's just some very questionable directions it goes in, and it doesn't always feel like everything we're looking at is totally necessary. I do get the idea of kind of dragging out a little bit to kind of give us the feel of the passage of time, to just show how long this has to feel for her in particular, regardless of how long it is. But I don't know. The Cujo reference, too, was very, just... So, but overall, it's fine. That's all three movies. I have to say the exact same thing about. It's fine. This is probably a very boring video for you. I really don't have much else to add other than very basics of they're fine. The three of these are fine, and that's really all there is to it. So, so yeah, let's do what Gerald's Game did not and cut this off before it's dragged out too long. We once again have, you'll get another Versus tomorrow, which I already shot yesterday, to go with the Trick or Treat one, and then, like I said, that will be continuous through the month of October as well as these reviews, so yes, that's what we have, so until then, that's it, we're done.